No need to spoil them. My mother's voice echoed in my head as I stood in the hospital corridor, watching my parents' faces crumple with desperation. I'm Elaine Mercer, 42, mother of twins, and the family's forgotten daughter. For years, I'd watched my parents shower my older brother Mitchell with everything: attention, praise, financial support. When he had kids, the pattern continued to the next generation. His children got the best of everything while mine were treated as afterthoughts. "Ellie, please," my father pleaded, his hand trembling as he clutched a stack of medical bills. "The treatment isn't covered by Medicare. We've tried everything." My mother sat in the wheelchair, oxygen cannula in her nose, looking smaller than I'd ever seen her. Pulmonary fibrosis. The specialist in Duluth had given her options, but the most promising treatment cost nearly $180,000. My parents had come to me because I was their only hope, their successful daughter who'd built a thriving physical therapy practice despite receiving zero help from them along the way. I just looked at them in silence, then turned and walked away. The sound of my boots on the linoleum floor seemed to echo through the corridor as I headed toward the elevator. A nurse at the station glanced up, then quickly looked away. She'd probably seen plenty of family drama unfold in these halls. Behind me, I heard my father call my name once more, his voice cracking. I didn't turn around. My finger jabbed the elevator button harder than necessary, and I fixed my gaze on the illuminated numbers above the doors, watching them count down. When the elevator arrived, I stepped inside and finally allowed myself to exhale. The drive back to Ashland took 40 minutes, enough time for the weight of my decision to settle in my chest. I'd left them there, desperate and confused. Part of me felt hollow, but another part, the part that had been collecting receipts of their neglect for decades, felt something close to relief. Rain started falling as I crossed the county line, fat drops that splattered against my windshield like tiny explosions. I turned the wipers to high and slowed down. The weather matched my mood, turbulent, unclear, dangerous if not navigated carefully. My thoughts drifted to Thanksgiving 3 years ago. Mitchell had flown in from Chicago with his perfect family, his investment banker wife Caroline with her expensive highlights, and their boys, Joshua and Tyler, dressed in matching outfits from some boutique that probably charged $100 for a child's sweater. My mother had spent weeks preparing. She'd ordered a heritage turkey from a specialty farm 2 counties over. She'd polished the silver that had belonged to her grandmother. She'd even redecorated the guest room where Mitchell and his family would stay. Emma and Liam had been excited to see their cousins. I'd tried to temper their expectations. The last time we'd all been together, my mother had given Joshua and Tyler envelopes with $50 each, just because, while my kids received nothing. When I'd confronted her later, she'd said, "Your kids don't need to be spoiled with handouts. They should learn the value of earning things." That Thanksgiving, my mother had presented Mitchell's boys with early Christmas gifts, brand new tablets for their schoolwork. Emma and Liam had watched, their faces carefully neutral, as their cousins tore open the packages. No early gifts for them. Not even the promise of something comparable at Christmas. When I pulled into my driveway, I saw my twins, Emma and Liam, shooting hoops in our modest yard. 16 years old, and growing too fast. They'd never known what it felt like to have grandparents who cherished them. "Mom, what's wrong?" Emma asked, catching the ball and tucking it under her arm. She could always read my face. "Nothing, sweetheart. Just a long day." I forced a smile. "How was school?" As they filled me in on teenage drama and upcoming tests, I remembered taking them to the dentist when they were 7. Emma needed braces, $4, $800 that insurance wouldn't cover. I'd called my parents not for a handout but just to ask if they could help with a small loan. "That seems excessive," my mother had said. My teeth weren't perfectly straight, and I turned out fine. No need to spoil them with unnecessary cosmetics. 2 weeks later, they'd paid for my nephew's private tennis lessons because he showed real promise. Inside the house, I checked my phone. 3 missed calls from Mitchell. I knew what was coming. I set my phone on the kitchen counter and started pulling ingredients from the refrigerator. Cooking had always been my therapy. Tonight, I needed the comfort of chopping vegetables, of transforming separate elements into something whole. I started on a stir-fry, the knife coming down with satisfying precision on carrots, bell peppers, and onions. Emma wandered in, dropping her backpack on a chair. "Grandma's sick, isn't she? That's where you were today." I hesitated, then nodded. My kids deserved honesty.
Yes.
She has pulmonary fibrosis. It's serious. Is she going to die? Liam appeared in the doorway, still holding the basketball. There's a treatment, but it's expensive. They're trying to figure things out. I resumed chopping, not meeting their eyes. They asked you for money, didn't they? Emma was too perceptive for her own good. They did. And you said no. It wasn't a question. I set down the knife and looked at my daughter. I walked away. I needed time to think. Neither of them looked shocked or judgmental. They'd witnessed enough over the years to understand the complicated dynamics at play. "What are you going to do?" Liam asked, spinning the basketball on his finger. "I don't know yet." But as I said it, I realized that wasn't entirely true. Something had shifted inside me when I walked out of that hospital. A decision was forming, not about whether I would help, but about how and on what terms. "What the hell, Elaine?" Mitchell's voice boomed through the phone that evening after the kids had gone upstairs to finish homework. "Mom needs the treatment, and you just walked away? After everything they've done for you?" I nearly laughed. Everything they've done for me? Like what, exactly? Don't start this again. They put you through college. They paid for 1 semester of community college before telling me I needed to learn independence. Meanwhile, they funded your entire education at Northwestern, your MBA, and the down payment on your house. That was different. I had a family to support. So did I, Mitchell. I was a single mother working 3 jobs while finishing my degree. Look, this isn't about us. Mom is dying. I closed my eyes, feeling the familiar twist of guilt and resentment. I'm aware of the situation. Then help. You've got the money. Everyone knows your practice is doing well. Yes, my practice was successful, painfully built from nothing while raising twins alone after their father decided parenthood wasn't for him. Every dollar represented hours away from my children, missed soccer games, and bedtime stories read over the phone from my office. "She's your mother too," Mitchell continued when I didn't respond. "You can't just let her suffer, because you're still holding onto some childhood grudge." That was Mitchell's favorite tactic, minimizing decades of inequality as mere childish resentment on my part. As if I were the unreasonable one for noticing the pattern, for feeling the pain of it. "I'll think about it," I said finally, and hung up before he could say anything else. I poured myself a glass of wine and stepped out onto the back deck. The rain had stopped, leaving everything with that fresh, clean scent. From inside, I could hear Emma playing guitar, something melancholy and minor. Liam was probably texting friends or playing video games. My imperfect, wonderful children who had grown up without the safety net that Mitchell's kids took for granted. My phone buzzed with a text from my father. "Please call us when you're ready to talk. Your mother is asking for you." I didn't respond. That night, I couldn't sleep. I pulled out an old shoebox from the top shelf of my closet, my archive of 20 years of unequal treatment. Inside were birthday cards with $20 for my children next to photos of my nephew's lavish parties. Medical bills I'd paid alone while my parents covered my brother's family's expenses. A newspaper clipping about my business opening, which my parents had skipped to attend my nephew's middle school play. Among these was a handwritten letter I'd received when I'd asked for help during my divorce. "We raised you to be independent, Elaine. This struggle will make you stronger." Independence. That had always been their explanation for why I received less. I needed to learn self-reliance, while Mitchell needed support. I spread the evidence of inequality across my bedroom floor, arranging it chronologically. A timeline of favoritism, stark and undeniable. My parents had never seen it as a problem. They'd normalized it, justified it, made it seem like they were doing me a favor by withholding support. And I had accepted it. Year after year, incident after incident, I'd swallowed my hurt and tried harder to earn their approval. I'd been the good daughter who understood, who didn't make waves, who smiled through holidays and birthdays even as the disparities grew more obvious. No more. I gathered the items and returned them to the box, but this time I placed it on my dresser, not hidden away on a shelf. A reminder of what I would no longer accept. Then I opened my laptop and began to draft an email to my attorney. The next morning, I drove to the hospital again. I found my father in the cafeteria, stirring a cup of coffee that had long gone cold. "Elaine," he said, straightening up. "You came back." "Yes." I sat across from him. "Where's Mitchell?" "He had to go back to Chicago. Work emergency." Of course. Mitchell was always excused from family responsibilities. My father looked terrible. His blue button-down shirt was wrinkled, and stubble covered his usually clean-shaven jaw. He'd always been particular about his appearance, another trait Mitchell had inherited. "I've been thinking about Mom's treatment," I said carefully. Hope flashed across his face. "You'll help. I have some questions first." I pulled out my phone and opened a spreadsheet I'd created the night before. "I've calculated that over the past 20 years, you and Mom have spent approximately $340,000 on Mitchell's family that you didn't spend on mine." My father's face reddened. "That's ridiculous. We don't keep score in this family." "Actually, Dad, you do. You've always kept score. Mitchell's needs were always greater, his accomplishments more significant, his children more worthy of investment." "That's not fair." "No, it isn't." I scrolled through my phone. "When Emma needed braces, you said it was cosmetic. When my nephew Joshua needed them the following year, you paid in full. When I needed help during my divorce, you told me struggle builds character. When Mitchell's wife wanted to renovate their kitchen, you wrote a check." My father shifted uncomfortably. "Mitchell has always had more responsibilities, more pressure. I was 26 with infant twins and a husband who abandoned us. What about my pressure, Dad?" He had no answer. "Here's what I'm going to do," I continued. "I'll pay for Mom's treatment." Relief washed over his face. "But there are conditions." He frowned. "What conditions?" "I want a family meeting. Tomorrow. You, me, Mitchell, and Mom if she's feeling well enough. I'll explain everything then. Elaine, your mother needs to start treatment as soon as possible. This isn't the time for family therapy sessions." "This isn't about therapy, Dad. This is about establishing clear expectations going forward. I'll wire the first payment to the hospital today so Mom can begin treatment, but the rest of the money depends on this meeting." He stared at me for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "I'll call Mitchell." I spent the rest of the day at my practice, focusing on my patients instead of my family drama. There was something grounding about helping others with their physical pain when my own emotional pain threatened to overwhelm me. My last appointment was with Mrs. Keller, an 80-year-old recovering from a hip replacement. She'd been coming to me for years, first for arthritis management, now for post-surgery rehabilitation. "You seem distracted today, dear," she said as I helped her through her exercises. "Just family stuff," I said, adjusting her position slightly.
"Ah, family.
The greatest blessing and the greatest curse, all wrapped up in the same package." She winced as she extended her leg. "My sister and I didn't speak for 15 years, you know." I hadn't known. "What happened?" "Our father left her the family business and me nothing. Said a business wasn't for a woman with children, that I had my husband to provide for me." She smiled grimly. "Never mind that my husband had a drinking problem and couldn't hold a job for more than 6 months at a time." "That's terrible." It was. But the worst part wasn't what my father did. It was that my sister accepted it as right and fair. Mrs. Keller rested for a moment, her breathing labored. 15 years of silence. Then one day she showed up at my door. Her husband had left her, and suddenly she understood what it felt like to be vulnerable. "Did you forgive her?" "Eventually. But first I made her acknowledge the hurt. No sweeping it under the rug, no pretending it never happened." She patted my hand. "Whatever's going on with your family, dear, don't settle for less than honest recognition of the truth." After she left, I sat in my office, thinking about her words. Recognition of the truth. That's what I needed from my family. Not just an agreement to change, but an acknowledgement of the past. 2 days later, my parents, Mitchell, and I sat in a conference room at the hospital. My mother looked frail but alert, watching me with wary eyes as I distributed copies of a document my lawyer had prepared. "What's this?" Mitchell asked, frowning at the papers. "A family care agreement," I said calmly. "I'm willing to pay for Mom's treatment, but I want everything formalized." My father cleared his throat. "Elaine, that's not necessary. We're family." "Yes, we are. And families should treat each other equally." I pointed to the document. "This agreement stipulates that I'll cover Mom's medical expenses. In return, you'll establish education trusts for all 4 grandchildren, Emma, Liam, Joshua, and Tyler, with equal amounts." Mitchell's face darkened. "My kids already have college funds." "Yes, funded by our parents. Mine don't." "So, this is extortion," he said, pushing the document away. "You'll help Mom, but only if you get something in return." "I get nothing from this arrangement. My children do. And so do yours. The trusts will be equally funded." My mother spoke for the first time, her voice thin. "Elaine, we've always tried to be fair." "No, you haven't." I kept my voice level. "You've consistently chosen Mitchell and his family over me and mine. I'm not asking for back payment for years of inequality. I'm simply asking that, moving forward, all your grandchildren are treated equally." "This is emotional blackmail," Mitchell snapped. I met his gaze steadily. "No, it's a boundary. I've spent my life watching you receive preferential treatment while being told I needed to be independent. Now I am independent, and suddenly that independence is inconvenient because you need something from me." My father rubbed his temples. "What if we refuse?" "Then I won't pay for the treatment." I gathered my purse. "Mom's health is covered by basic Medicare. She'll receive standard care. It won't be the cutting-edge treatment the specialist recommended, but it will be adequate." "You would let Mom suffer to make a point?" Mitchell's voice rose. "I'm not the one making her suffer. I'm offering to help, with reasonable conditions." I stood up. "I love you all, but I'm done accepting scraps from the family table. My children deserve better, and so do I." As I turned to leave, my mother's voice stopped me. "Wait." I looked back. She was leaning forward in her wheelchair, a flush of color in her cheeks that hadn't been there before. "I want to hear more about these trusts," she said. Mitchell started to protest, but she silenced him with a look I'd never seen her direct at him before. "How would it work?" she asked me. I sat back down and explained the details. Equal sums deposited for each grandchild. Equal terms. Equal opportunities. When I finished, my mother looked at my father. Some unspoken communication passed between them. "We'll consider it," my father said finally. I walked out of that meeting feeling more powerful than I had in years. In the parking lot, my phone buzzed with a text from Mitchell. "You've changed." I typed back, "No. I've finally stopped accepting the unacceptable." That evening, I took the twins out for dinner at their favorite burger place. As we squeezed into a vinyl booth under the fluorescent lights, I felt a bizarre sense of calm. I'd done it. I'd finally stood up for myself and my children. "So," Emma said, studying me over the top of her menu, "something happened." I smiled. "Something happened? With Grandma and Grandpa?"
Liam asked.
I nodded. "I offered to pay for Grandma's treatment, but I set some conditions. I told them about the trusts, about my demand for equality." "They're going to hate you for this," Emma said thoughtfully. "Maybe. Or maybe they'll finally understand." "And if they don't?" Liam asked. "Then at least I'll know I tried to change things." I reached across the table and squeezed their hands. "What matters is that you two know your worth isn't determined by how others value you." We ordered our food and talked about lighter things: Emma's band practice, Liam's upcoming track meet, the summer trip we were planning to the Boundary Waters. Normal life, continuing despite the earthquake I'd caused in my family dynamics. When we got home, there was a voicemail from my father. "We've discussed your proposal," he said, his voice tense but controlled. "We'd like to meet again tomorrow to go over some details. Your mother's doctor wants to begin treatment soon." I called him back and arranged the meeting. 3 days later, my lawyer called. My parents had signed the agreement, establishing equal trusts for all 4 grandchildren. Mitchell had signed too, though I imagined it was with considerable reluctance. I arranged for my mother's treatment to begin the following week. The first session was difficult. My mother was weak and nauseated afterward. I sat with her in the treatment room, holding a basin while she retched. "You don't have to stay," she said between waves of nausea. "I know." I handed her a damp cloth to wipe her mouth. "I want to." She studied me with red-rimmed eyes. "Why are you doing this?" "Because you're my mother. After everything, after what you said about how we treated you. Setting boundaries doesn't mean I don't love you. It means I love myself, too." She closed her eyes, tears leaking from the corners. "I never meant to hurt you, Elaine." "I know, but you did." The words hung between us, honest and painful. For once, neither of us tried to soften the truth. The months that followed were a strange mixture of reconciliation and continued tension. My mother's health improved gradually with the treatment. Mitchell remained cool toward me, though he made more of an effort with Emma and Liam, inviting them to stay with his family for a week during summer break. My father seemed to age years and months, caught between his wife's illness, his son's resentment, and his daughter's newfound assertiveness. But slowly, tentatively, he began to change. He called my children regularly. He asked about their interests, their dreams. He remembered birthdays with appropriate gifts, not token gestures. Small shifts. Nothing dramatic, but noticeable. 6 months later, I sat on the porch of my newly purchased lakeside cabin, watching Emma and Liam splash in the water with their cousins. My mother, responding well to treatment, sat beside me in an Adirondack chair, a light blanket over her legs despite the summer heat. "The kids seem to be getting along," she commented. "They always have," I replied. The division was never theirs. She nodded slowly. "I've been thinking about what you said about the unequal treatment. I didn't see it then, but I'm starting to." I sipped my iced tea, letting the statement hang in the air. Too little, too late, perhaps, but it was something. "Your father and I were wrong," she continued. "We told ourselves we were doing what was best, but we were unfair to you, and to Emma and Liam." Across the lawn, my father was teaching all 4 grandchildren how to grill burgers, giving each of them equal attention. Mitchell stood awkwardly to the side, still adjusting to the new family dynamic. "I'm not looking for apologies," I said finally. "I just want things to be different going forward." My mother reached over and placed her thin hand on mine. "They will be. I promise." I didn't fully believe her. Decades of patterns don't change overnight, but I was no longer that desperate daughter seeking approval and support. I'd built my own life, protected my children, and finally demanded the respect I deserved. Later that evening, after the kids had gone to bed, I found Mitchell sitting alone on the dock, his feet dangling over the water. "Mind if I join you?" I asked. He shrugged, which I took as permission. We sat in silence for a while, watching the moon's reflection ripple on the lake. "Do you remember when we were kids?" he said finally. "And Dad took us fishing on Lake Nebagaman?" I did remember. I'd been about 9, Mitchell 13. "You caught that huge northern pike. And you fell out of the boat trying to net it for me." A hint of a smile crossed his face. "Dad was so mad. Said you ruined a perfect moment." The memory stung, even after all these years. "He made me sit in my wet clothes all the way home." Mitchell looked surprised. "I don't remember that part. There's a lot you don't remember or never noticed." I wasn't trying to be cruel, just honest. He was quiet for a moment. "I'm starting to see that." It wasn't an apology or an acknowledgement of his role in perpetuating the inequality, but it was a crack in his perfect narrative. A beginning. "Mom looks better," he said, changing the subject. "The treatment is working. Thanks for that." The words seemed to cost him. "You're welcome." Another silence stretched between us, less tense than before. "I couldn't have done it, you know," he said suddenly. "Paid for her treatment, I mean. My investments took a hit last year, and with the boys' private school tuition and the house in Lake Forest." I bit back the obvious response, that he'd been living beyond his means for years, cushioned by our parents' generosity. Instead, I just nodded. You did good, Ellie, he said, using my childhood nickname for the first time in years. You built something real on your own. I admire that. It wasn't everything, but it was something. Recognition, however small, of the strength it had taken to succeed without the safety net he'd always had. Thanks, Mitch. As the night grew cooler, we headed back to the cabin, walking side by side but not quite together. The distance between us had narrowed, but it hadn't disappeared. Maybe it never would entirely. That was okay. I wasn't looking for perfect reconciliation or dramatic apologies. Just recognition of the truth, as Mrs. Keller had said. And the beginning of change. As the sun began to set over the lake, I watched my family, all of them, gathered in one place, equal at last. Not because they'd suddenly become fair, but because I'd finally learned to walk away when I needed to, and to set terms when I decided to return. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do isn't to forgive or forget, but to clearly say, no more. This is how it will be from now on. Take it or leave it. They had taken it. And somehow, we were all better for it.